My name is Jonathan Brandt. I'm from New York City. Warren, you wrote in 1977 that the return on equity and growth of book value for corporate America tended towards and averaged about 13%, no matter the inflation environment. After properly expensing options and so-called non-recurring charges, and taking into account the high price-earnings ratio paid for increasingly frequent acquisitions, do you think that 13% figure is still roughly correct? Also, what quantitative method would you suggest that investors use for expensing the option grants of publicly traded firms where there is no realistic prospect for the substitution of such an options program with a cash-based performance incentive plan? In other words, how do you derive the 5 to 10% earnings dilution referred to in this year's Berkshire's annual report? And is it possible that the dilution figure could be even higher than that? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Johnny. Just like Martin Wiegand, John Brandt is the son of a very good friend of mine where we worked together for decades, and John is now an analyst with Ruane Cunniff and a very good one. He says it didn't happen this way, but when he was about 4 years old, I was at the house for dinner with the parents, and he suggested to me after dinner, he said, "How about a game of chess?" I looked at this 4-year-old, and I thought, this is the kind of guy who said, "Should we play for money?" And he said, "Name your stakes," so I backed off. And we sat down, and after about 12 moves, I could see I was in mortal trouble, so I suggested it was time for him to get to bed. The question about return on equity, it's true. Back in 1977, I believe, I wrote an article for Fortune and talked about this, more or less, this figure of 12 or 13% that return on equity kept coming back to, and explained why I didn't think it was affected by inflation, which was the hot topic of the day very much. And it wasn't. But in the last few years, earnings have been reported at very high figures on the S&P, although you've had these very substantial restructuring charges, which every management likes to tell you doesn't count. I love that. When they say, well, we earned $1 a share in total last year, but look at the $2 a share that we tell you we really earned. The other $1 a share doesn't count it. And then they throw in mistakes of the past or mistakes of the future, and every 3 or 4 years ask you to forget this as if it doesn't mean anything. We've never had a charge like that we've set forth in Berkshire, and we never will. It isn't that we don't have things we do that cost us money in moving around, but we do not ask you to forget about those costs. The report, even allowing for options costs and restructuring charge and everything, return on equity has been surprisingly high in the last few years. And there's a real question in a capitalistic society whether, if long-term rates are 5.5%, whether return on equity can be across the board some number like 18 or 20%. There are an awful lot of companies out there that are implicitly promising you, either by what they say their growth in earnings will be, or various other ways, that they're going to earn at these rates of 20% plus. And I'm dubious about those claims, but we will see. The question about how we charge for stock options is very simple. If we look at what a company issues in options over, say, a 5-year period, and divide by 5 because the grants are irregular, or whatever's, if there's some reason why that seems inappropriate, we might use something else. But we try to figure out what the average option issuance is going to be. And then we say to ourselves, how much could the company have received for those options if they'd sold them as warrants to the public? I mean, they can sell me options on any company in the world. I'll pay some price for an option on anything. And we would look at what the fair market value of those options would be that day if they were transferable options. Now, they aren't transferable, but they also, employees sometimes get their options repriced downward, which you don't get if you have public options. So we say that the cost to the shareholder of issuing the options is about what could be received if they turned those options into warrants and sold them public, or sold them as options. And that's the cost. I mean, it's a compensation cost. And just try going to a company that's had a lot of options grants every year and tell them you're going to quit giving the options and pay people the same amount of money. They'll say you took away part of my earnings. And we say if you've taken away part of the earnings, then let's show it in the income account and show it as a cost, because it is a cost. And I think actually a number of auditors agreed to that position many years ago, and they started receiving pressure from their clients who said, gee, that might hurt our earnings if we reported that cost. And the auditors caved, and they put pressure on Congress when it came up a few years ago, and I think it's a scandal, but it's happened. We are going to, in evaluating a business, whether we're going to buy the entire business or whether we're going to buy part of it.
你如果想要成为价值投资者，请点击订阅